100 doctors stood helpless as a billionaire's heir died inside the womb, until a beggar from the streets did the impossible. A billionaire's wife lay dying on the finest hospital bed money could buy. For 43 agonizing hours, 100 of the world's most celebrated physicians had attempted everything modern medicine could offer. Nothing worked. The infant was trapped, wedged in a position that defied every protocol, every procedure, every cutting-edge technology at their disposal. Time was hemorrhaging away like the mother's fading strength. Then something happened that would shatter everything these doctors believed about expertise, about knowledge, about who holds the power to heal. The delivery room door creaked open. Not pushed by another specialist with another degree from another prestigious institution, but by weathered, trembling hands that belonged to someone who shouldn't have been there at all. Elena Rodriguez was 54 years old. For the past 19 years, she had been invisible in these gleaming corridors. Not as staff. Not even as a cleaner with a paycheck and a name badge. Elena was the beggar who sat outside Manhattan Mercy Hospital's east entrance, the woman passers-by stepped over without seeing. The voice asking for spare change that wealthy ears had long learned to filter out. She wore layers of donated clothing that smelled of the streets. Her hair was streaked with premature gray from decades of sleeping rough. Her face carried the map of a hard life, lines etched by hunger, by loss, by the brutal arithmetic of survival. But her hands remembered something the world had tried to make her forget. Elena knocked on the delivery suite door with knuckles swollen from arthritis and cold. The sound was barely audible over the chaos inside, the frantic beeping of failing monitors, the desperate voices of physicians arguing over procedures, the weakening cries of Melissa Thornton as her body surrendered to exhaustion. A nurse opened the door a crack, her face flushed with stress and fear. "This is a restricted area. You need to, I can save them both," Elena said. Her voice was hoarse from years of calling out to indifferent crowds, but it carried an unmistakable certainty. The baby and the mother. "I know what's wrong. I know how to fix it." The nurse's expression shifted from annoyance to disbelief. "Ma'am, we have 100 of the world's leading obstetricians in there. If they can't, they don't know what I know." Elena's dark eyes locked onto the nurse's. There was no pride in her words, no arrogance. Just the calm statement of fact. "In my country, I delivered 643 babies. I lost only 2, and those losses haunt me still. This baby doesn't have to die. Let me help." The nurse started to close the door. "I'm calling security." But Elena had already seen past her, through the gap in the door. She'd seen the monitor screens displaying the infant's plummeting heart rate. She'd seen the team preparing emergency surgical equipment. She'd seen Melissa Thornton's face, chalk white and terrified, the face of a woman who knew she was losing her child. And Elena had seen something else. Something the 100 doctors with their machines and their protocols couldn't see. She'd seen the exact problem, recognized it in the curve of Melissa's abdomen, in the pattern of her pain, in the way her body was fighting itself. The baby was in occipito-posterior position, face up instead of face down, the skull pressing against the mother's spine. But not just that. The infant's shoulder was caught behind the pelvic bone, twisted at an angle that made descent impossible. A double complication that modern obstetrics would solve with scalpels and surgical steel. But Elena knew another way. An ancient way. A way that had been passed down through 23 generations of birth attendants in her family, from mother to daughter, from grandmother to granddaughter. Each one learning not from textbooks, but from 10,000 hours of hands on laboring bodies, fingers reading the secret language of birth that no machine could translate. "Please," Elena said as the nurse pushed the door shut. "Just 5 minutes. If I fail, you lose nothing. If I succeed, you save 2 lives and avoid a surgery that might kill them both. 5 minutes to prove that the woman you've ignored for 19 years knows something worth hearing." The door closed. Elena stood in the corridor, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd tried. She'd spoken up. That was more than she'd done in nearly 2 decades of invisible existence. Then she heard it through the heavy door. A sound that turned her blood to ice water. Melissa Thornton screamed. Not the productive sounds of active labor, but the raw, primal scream of a body breaking, of hope dying, of a mother losing her child. And beneath that scream, Elena heard Dr. Patricia Chen's voice, tight with barely controlled panic. "We're losing fetal heartbeat. Prepare for crash cesarean. We're out of time." Elena looked at her reflection in the polished hospital floor. A beggar. A nobody. A woman the world had discarded like trash. Then she looked at her hands. These hands that had guided hundreds of babies into the world. These hands that carried knowledge older than any medical degree. These hands that remembered. What would you risk if you knew you could save 2 lives? What would you sacrifice if staying silent meant living with their deaths forever? Elena knocked again. Harder this time. Loud enough to demand attention. Loud enough to refuse invisibility. What happened in the next 60 seconds would either save 2 lives or destroy Elena completely. But the real miracle? It would expose a truth about knowledge, power, and expertise that would shake modern medicine to its foundations. You won't believe what happens when those hands that begged for coins finally touched that billionaire's wife. The door opened again. But this time, everything would change. The nurse who answered Elena's second knock wasn't the same one. This was Dr. Patricia Chen herself, the lead obstetrician, a woman whose credentials read like a greatest hits of medical achievement. Yale Medical School, fellowship at Johns Hopkins, chief of obstetrics at Manhattan Mercy for 12 years. Her hands had delivered over 3,000 babies. Her research had been published in every major medical journal. She was considered one of the finest maternal fetal specialists in the Western Hemisphere. And right now, her eyes were filled with the kind of desperation that comes from watching expertise fail. "You're the homeless woman from outside," Dr. Chen said. It wasn't a question. She'd seen Elena countless times over the years, had even dropped coins in her cup on occasion, though she'd never actually looked at her face while doing it. "My name is Elena Rodriguez," Elena said, refusing to accept the label of homeless woman even now. "And yes, I know you have no reason to trust me. I know what I look like. I know what I smell like. I know that everything about this situation is insane. Then why are you here?" Dr. Chen's voice wasn't unkind, just exhausted beyond measure. "Because I hear that woman screaming and I know exactly what's wrong. The baby is posterior with an impacted shoulder. You've been trying to manage it with position changes and manual rotation, but you can't get the leverage you need because you're fighting the anatomy instead of working with it." Dr. Chen's eyes widened fractionally. "How do you in Oaxaca, where I learned my craft, we see this presentation every few dozen births. It's called El Abrazo del Diablo, the devil's embrace. The baby gets locked in position, and the harder everyone pushes, the tighter the lock becomes. Your monitors are telling you to intervene. Your protocols are telling you to cut. But there's another way." Behind Dr. Chen, Elena could see into the delivery suite. It looked like a war room. Monitors everywhere, their screens painting the story of 2 lives hanging by threads. 100 doctors, the number was barely an exaggeration, crowded the massive space. Alexander Thornton had spared no expense for his wife's delivery, had assembled specialists from every corner of obstetric medicine. Perinatologists, neonatologists, anesthesiologists, surgical teams standing by. The finest minds modern medicine could assemble. All of them helpless. Melissa Thornton lay in the center of this organized chaos, her skin the color of old paper, her body shaking with exhaustion. She'd been pushing for 6 hours straight. Before that, 37 hours of labor that had drained every reserve of strength her 45-year-old body possessed. This was her last chance at biological motherhood after years of failed IVF treatments, after 3 heartbreaking miscarriages, after she'd almost given up hope. And now that hope was dying. "What exactly are you proposing?" Dr. Chen asked. Behind her, Elena saw Alexander Thornton, the tech billionaire whose artificial intelligence company had revolutionized 3 industries and made him the 8th richest person on Earth. He was on his phone, probably summoning even more specialists, as if more expertise could somehow solve what 100 experts couldn't. "Let me put my hands on her," Elena said simply. "Let me feel what the machines can't measure." Give me 10 minutes. If I can't help, you haven't lost anything. You were going to surgery anyway. But if I can turn this baby, if I can guide it into the right position, you save Melissa from surgery she might not survive. You save the baby from the trauma of being cut out. You give them both the birth they deserve. You're asking me to let a woman with no medical license, no credentials, no paperwork, Elena interrupted. That's what you mean. I have no paperwork that says I know what I'm doing. But Dr. Chin, you've been a physician for how long? 20 years? 25? You know that knowledge doesn't only come from universities. You know that wisdom doesn't only live in textbooks. Somewhere deep down, you know that the woman standing in front of you, despite what she looks like, despite where she sleeps at night, knows something real. Dr. Chen's jaw tightened. Elena could see the war happening behind her eyes. Protocol versus desperation. Credentials versus instinct. The safe choice versus the right choice. If something goes wrong, Dr. Chen said slowly, if you make this worse, I lose my medical license. I lose everything I've built. The hospital gets sued for malpractice. You could face criminal charges. I know, Elena said. And I'm asking you to risk all of that anyway. Because that woman in there is running out of time, and her baby is running out of heartbeats, and we both know it. Behind Dr. Chen, one of the monitors let out a sharp alarm. A nurse called out, fetal heart rate down to 60. Severe bradycardia. We need to move now. Prep the OR, Dr. Chen called back. Then she looked at Elena with an expression that was equal parts madness and hope. You get 5 minutes. Not 10. 5. I'll be monitoring every second. At the first sign of distress, we stop and go to surgery. Understood. Understood, Elena said. And you'll work under my direct supervision. Legally, I'm the one performing the procedure. You're just guiding my hands. It was a fiction, a legal shield, but Elena didn't care about credit. She cared about the baby. However you need to structure it. Dr. Chen stepped aside. Then get in here before I change my mind. Elena walked into the delivery suite. 100 faces turned toward her. Most registered shock. The beggar from outside was in the sterile delivery room. A few showed anger. Dr. Marcus Webb, a renowned specialist from Stanford, actually stepped forward to block her path. Patricia, what the hell are you doing? This is completely stand down, Marcus, Dr. Chen said with steel in her voice. This is my call, my responsibility, and my license on the line. You can file a complaint with the board later. Right now, we're trying something different. Elena approached the bed. Melissa Thornton's eyes found hers, and in them Elena saw something she recognized. Not judgment about her appearance, not disgust at her smell. Just the desperate hope of a mother willing to try anything to save her child. Who are you? Melissa whispered. My name is Elena, she said softly, in the voice she'd used to calm 600 laboring women. And I'm going to help you meet your baby. But I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Melissa looked at her husband. Alexander Thornton stared at Elena like she was a hallucination, like his exhausted mind had conjured a beggar into his wife's delivery room. Melissa, no. We have the best doctors in the world here. We don't need... Yes, Melissa interrupted, her eyes still locked on Elena's. I trust you. Elena moved to the bedside. She didn't ask permission to touch. There was no time for extended protocols. She simply placed her hands on Melissa's swollen abdomen, and the moment her palms made contact with skin, everything else fell away. This was what her grandmother had called el conocimiento, the knowing. The ability to read a body story through touch, to feel what was invisible, to understand the geometry of bones and baby and possibility. In the next 5 minutes, Elena's hands would do something that 100 doctors said was impossible. But what she discovered inside Melissa's body would reveal a truth that modern medicine had forgotten. And when those hands, the same hands that had begged for spare change just hours ago, began to move, everyone in that room would learn that sometimes the greatest expertise comes from the most unexpected places. What happened next would either prove Elena was a miracle worker or expose her as a dangerous fraud. Elena's fingers began to move. And what they found made every doctor in that room hold their breath. Elena's hands moved across Melissa's belly with the confidence of a woman who had done this 1,000 times before. Not the tentative touch of someone guessing, but the certain pressure of someone reading a familiar language. Her fingers pressed gently here, firmly there, mapping the terrain of flesh and muscle and the precious life struggling within. She could feel everything. The tight band of uterine muscle, exhausted from 43 hours of contractions. The baby's skull, hard and round, pressed against Melissa's lower spine. The shoulders, one wedged behind the pubic bone at an impossible angle. The rapid flutter of the infant's heartbeat, weakening with each passing second. The baby is not just posterior, Elena said, her voice calm despite the crisis. The left shoulder is caught behind the pelvic bone. When Melissa pushes, the shoulder jams tighter instead of releasing. This is why nothing has worked. You've been trying to bring the baby down, but the baby cannot descend until the shoulder is freed. Dr. Chin was watching the monitors, watching Elena's hands, watching everything with the intensity of someone whose entire career hung in the balance. How do you propose to free it? I don't fight against the body, Elena explained, her hands never stopping their gentle exploration. I work with it. Between contractions, when the uterus is soft, I can manipulate the baby's position. Not forcing, not pushing hard, that would cause distress. Instead, I guide. I suggest. I show the baby a different path. That's not possible without internal manipulation, Dr. Marcus Webb interjected from across the room. You'd need to reach inside the birth canal to reposition a trapped shoulder. External manipulation alone can't, you're wrong, Elena said simply, without looking at him. In Oaxaca, we learn techniques that go back 23 generations. My great-great-great-grandmother delivered babies using these methods before your medical schools even existed. We didn't have the luxury of surgery. We didn't have cesarean sections to save us when things got complicated. So we learned to work miracles with nothing but our hands and our knowledge. She felt a contraction building beneath her palms. The uterus tightened, turning rock hard under her fingers. She kept her hands motionless, letting the contraction pass, feeling how the baby responded to the pressure, understanding the mechanics of what was happening. When this contraction ends, Elena said, I'm going to apply pressure to the baby's shoulder through the abdominal wall. It will look like I'm pushing down, but I'm actually rotating. 30 degrees clockwise. That will free the shoulder from behind the bone. Then, with the next contraction, when Melissa pushes, the baby will be able to descend. And if it doesn't work? Alexander Thornton demanded. He'd moved closer, watching Elena with a mixture of desperate hope and barely contained fury. This beggar woman had her hands on his wife, and every instinct in him wanted to throw her out. But Melissa had said yes. Melissa had given permission. And he loved his wife enough to respect that, even when every logical part of his brain screamed that this was insane. Then you go to surgery, Elena said. You've lost 5 minutes. That's all. But if it does work, your wife doesn't get cut open. Your baby doesn't get pulled out through an incision. They get to finish this journey the way nature intended. The contraction ended. Melissa's belly softened. Elena didn't hesitate. Her hands found the precise point on Melissa's lower abdomen where the baby's shoulder created a hard prominence beneath the skin. She pressed down with her right hand, using her left to stabilize, and began to apply a slow, steady rotational pressure. Every doctor in the room leaned forward. Some watched Elena's hands. Others watched the ultrasound screen, where the baby's position was displayed in grainy black and white. Still others watched the fetal monitor, tracking the infant's heart rate, ready to call the whole thing off if the numbers dropped. Elena closed her eyes. This wasn't about seeing. This was about feeling. She could sense the baby's body under her hands, could feel the shoulder beginning to shift. Not quickly rushing would jam it tighter. Slowly, gradually, with the patience that only comes from doing something hundreds of times. The shoulders moving, a voice called out. Dr. Sarah Kim, monitoring the ultrasound. I can see it on the screen. It's actually rotating. Heart rate holding steady, another voice added. 140. 145. It's coming up. Elena kept the pressure constant, kept the rotation smooth. Her arthritic fingers ached, but she didn't let that slow her. She delivered babies in rainstorms with hands so cold she couldn't feel her own fingers. She delivered twins by candlelight when the electricity failed in her village. She delivered a breech baby while suffering from dengue fever, her own body burning with infection even as she worked to bring new life into the world. This pain was nothing. This mattered too much to let pain stop her. There, Elena whispered. She felt it, the moment when the shoulder slipped free from behind the pelvic bone, when the baby's body suddenly had room to maneuver, when the impossible became possible. The shoulder is released. Next contraction, Melissa needs to push. Hard. Everything she has left. I don't have anything left, Melissa sobbed. Her voice was barely audible, scraped raw from screaming. I can't. I've been pushing for hours. I'm so tired. Elena moved to the head of the bed, bringing her face close to Melissa's. She took the exhausted woman's hand in her own weathered, calloused grip. Listen to me, she said with quiet intensity. Your baby is ready. I've made the path clear. But your baby needs you to bring them the last little bit of the way. One more push, Melissa. One more, and you become a mother. Can you give me one more? Melissa looked into Elena's eyes. What she saw there wasn't the face of a beggar, wasn't the face of someone society had discarded. She saw the face of a woman who understood birth the way sailors understand the sea intimately, completely, with the kind of knowledge that only comes from a lifetime of navigation. One more, Melissa whispered. A contraction built. Elena could see it in the way Melissa's face tightened, in the way her body gathered itself for one final effort. Now, Elena said. Push now. Give your baby everything. Melissa pushed. She screamed with the effort, channeling every ounce of remaining strength into that moment. Alexander grabbed her hand, tears streaming down his face. Dr. Chen positioned herself to catch the baby, her hands ready, her face tense with concentration. The room held its breath. Elena kept her hand on Melissa's belly, feeling the baby move. Down through the birth canal. Down past the point where it had been stuck for hours. Down, down, descending at last, the path cleared, the journey nearly complete. I can see the head. Dr. Chen called out. Melissa, the head is crowning. One more push. Just one more. I can't, Melissa gasped. I can't do another one. Yes, you can, Elena said fiercely. Your baby is right there. Right there. You can touch your baby's head if you reach down. Feel. She guided Melissa's hand down between her legs. Melissa's fingers touched the crown of her baby's head, felt the soft hair, felt the skull that was about to emerge into the world. And something changed in Melissa's face. The exhaustion was still there, but beneath it, Elena saw a primal power awaken. The power that had been pushing babies out of women's bodies since the beginning of human existence. The power that didn't care about pain or exhaustion or impossibility. The power of a mother meeting her child. The next contraction came. Melissa didn't wait for anyone to tell her what to do. She bore down with a force that came from somewhere beyond physical strength. Rehook, what emerged in the next 30 seconds would stun everyone in that room. But the miracle wasn't just the baby, it was what happened when a beggar's ancient knowledge collided with modern medicine's greatest minds. In moments, Elena would either be hailed as a hero, or face consequences that could destroy her forever. Because saving a billionaire's baby when you're nobody, that comes with a price no one expected. The baby's head emerged. And then everything Elena had risked her life for became real. The infant slid into Dr. Chen's waiting hands in a rush of fluid and blood and the raw miracle of birth. For one terrible second, the baby was silent. No cry. No movement. Just a small, slick body that looked impossibly fragile in the harsh lights of the delivery room. Elena's heart stopped. Had she been wrong? Had she waited too long? Had her confidence, her certainty, her ancient knowledge failed at the moment it mattered most? Then the baby gasped. A small, shuddering breath that filled tiny lungs for the first time. And then another. And then a cry. Not weak or tentative, but strong and indignant, the sound of a child announcing their arrival into the world with fury and power. The delivery room erupted. 100 doctors who had stood frozen, watching a beggar do the impossible, suddenly broke into applause. Some were crying. Others were laughing with relief. Dr. Marcus Webb, who had protested Elena's involvement most vocally, stood with his hand over his mouth, shaking his head in disbelief. "It's a girl," Dr. Chen announced, her voice thick with emotion. She placed the baby on Melissa's chest, skin to skin, the infant's cries already softening as she felt her mother's heartbeat. "You have a daughter." Melissa was sobbing, her hands trembling as she touched her baby's face, her fingers, her tiny perfect toes. "Hello," she whispered. "Hello, my love. We did it. We made it." Alexander Thornton collapsed into a chair, his composure, the famous control that had built a business empire, completely shattered. He was crying so hard his shoulders shook. "Thank you," he kept saying to no one and everyone. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Elena stepped back from the bed, her role finished. The doctors moved in, performing the necessary post-delivery checks, cutting the umbilical cord, ensuring both mother and baby were stable. Elena watched from the edge of the room, suddenly aware again of what she was, a beggar in a delivery room. A woman who smelled of the streets standing among the most elite medical professionals in the world. She turned to leave quietly, to slip back into invisibility before anyone decided to question what had just happened, before the lawyers and the administrators and the consequences caught up to her. But Dr. Chen's voice stopped her. "Elena, wait." The lead obstetrician handed the baby to a nurse and walked over to where Elena stood. Her face was streaked with tears, her composure as fractured as Alexander's. She looked at Elena for a long moment, and in her eyes was something Elena hadn't seen directed at her in 19 years. Respect. "What you just did," Dr. Chen said quietly, "shouldn't have been possible. According to everything I learned in medical school, according to every protocol and procedure I've been trained in, that baby should have required a cesarean section. The position was too complicated. The labor was too prolonged. The risks were too high. But you let me try anyway," Elena said. "That took courage." "No," Dr. Chen shook her head. "You had the courage. I just had enough sense to recognize it. You saw what 100 of us missed. You knew what 100 of us didn't know. And you saved 2 lives with knowledge that our medical system would have dismissed as worthless." She reached out and took Elena's hand. "Where did you learn to do that?" Elena looked down at their joined hands, the smooth, manicured hand of a successful physician holding the rough, weathered hand of a street beggar. "In Oaxaca," she said. "In a village so poor that most people here couldn't find it on a map. My grandmother was a partera, a traditional birth attendant. She learned from her mother, who learned from her mother, going back 23 generations. When I was 7 years old, she told me I had las manos que recuerdan, the hands that remember." "The hands that remember," Dr. Chen repeated softly. "What does that mean?" "It means that some knowledge lives in the body, not the mind. It means that my hands remember things my brain might forget. Every baby I ever caught, every mother I ever helped, every complication I ever solved, my hands remember all of it. The textbooks you studied, they're written by people who observed births. My knowledge comes from people who lived births, who had no choice but to understand them completely because there was no hospital, no surgery, no backup plan. Just hands and knowledge and 23 generations of women refusing to let mothers die." Dr. Marcus Webb had approached during this exchange. His earlier hostility had vanished, replaced by something that looked like shame. "I owe you an apology," he said to Elena. "I tried to stop you. I thought you were dangerous, that you'd make things worse. I was wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. You were protecting your patient," Elena said without anger. "That's your job." "No," Webb insisted. "I was protecting my ego. I was protecting the idea that only people like me, people with degrees from elite universities, people with credentials and publications and prestigious positions, could possibly know anything worth knowing. You just proved that assumption is not only wrong, it's dangerous. How many women have had unnecessary surgeries because we didn't know what you know? How many babies have been pulled out with scalpels when they could have been guided out with skilled hands?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Alexander Thornton had composed himself enough to stand. He walked over to Elena, his eyes red but clear. He looked at her for a long moment, really seeing her for the first time. Not a beggar. Not an inconvenience. Not a woman to step over on his way into the hospital. But a person. A healer. Someone who had just saved everything he loved in the world. "What's your full name?" he asked. "Elena Maria Rodriguez," she said. "Elena Maria Rodriguez," Alexander repeated, as if committing it to memory. "I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Because whatever you say next is going to change your life." Elena waited, her heart pounding. "Why were you begging outside this hospital?" Alexander asked. "With knowledge like that, with skills that just saved my wife and daughter when 100 experts couldn't, why were you on the streets?" The question cracked something open inside Elena. All the shame, all the grief, all the years of being invisible came rushing up her throat. She tried to speak and couldn't. Tried again and managed only a whisper. "Because 19 years ago, I crossed the border with nothing. No papers. No money. No way to prove who I was or what I knew. I tried to work as a midwife here, tried to help women in my community give birth. But I was reported. They said I was practicing medicine without a license. They said I was endangering lives. I was arrested, charged, almost deported." She took a shuddering breath. "A lawyer helped me avoid deportation, but only if I promised never to practice medicine again. So I stopped. I stayed silent. I watched pregnant women walk past me every day, going into this hospital to give birth, and I said nothing. I knew I could help them. I knew I had knowledge that could make their births easier, safer, better. But I was terrified that if I spoke up, I'd be arrested again. I'd be sent back to Mexico, back to the violence I'd escaped. So I became invisible. I sat outside begging because it was the only way I could stay close to the place where births happened, even if I couldn't participate in them anymore." Tears were streaming down her face now. "Until today. Until I heard that woman screaming and I couldn't stay silent anymore. Even knowing I might be arrested. Even knowing I might lose everything. I couldn't let that baby die when I knew how to save it." The room had gone silent. Every person there was listening, understanding for the first time the magnitude of what Elena had risked. What Alexander Thornton did next would shock everyone in that room. Because this billionaire, this man who could buy anything, solve any problem with money, was about to make an offer that would change Elena's life forever. But it would also expose a truth about America's medical system that no one wanted to face. And Elena's answer? It would start a revolution that would reach far beyond one hospital, one city, one miracle birth. What came next would prove that sometimes the greatest power isn't money or credentials, it's the courage to value knowledge wherever it comes from. Alexander Thornton pulled out his phone. What he did next would change everything. Alexander Thornton stood in the delivery room, his newborn daughter crying softly in his wife's arms, and made a decision that would alter the course of his life and the lives of thousands of women he would never meet. He pulled out his phone and made 3 calls in rapid succession. The first was to his head of legal affairs. "I need you to assemble the best immigration attorneys in the country. I don't care what it costs. We're getting someone legal status, work authorization, and whatever documentation she needs. And I need it done yesterday." The second was to his foundation director. "I'm establishing a new initiative. Full funding, no budget cap. We're creating a program to integrate traditional birth knowledge into modern obstetric care. I want research, training programs, advocacy for policy changes. Everything needed to make sure what I just witnessed becomes standard practice, not a miracle exception." The third call was to someone whose voice made everyone in the room straighten unconsciously, the governor of New York. "Tom, it's Alexander. I need a favor. Actually, I need you to help me fix a broken system. I'm standing in a delivery room where a woman with no medical license just saved my daughter's life after 100 credentialed doctors failed. We need to talk about how this state recognizes traditional medical practitioners, about how we're wasting expertise because it doesn't come with the right paperwork. How soon can you meet?" He hung up and turned back to Elena, who stood frozen, unable to process what she was hearing. "I can't promise it will be fast," Alexander said. "Bureaucracy moves slowly, even when you have resources to push it. But here's what I can promise. You will never sleep on the streets again. You will never go hungry again. You will never be invisible again. And most importantly, you will never have to hide your knowledge again." "Sir, I don't understand," Elena whispered. "Why would you do this for me?" Alexander looked at his daughter, now peacefully nursing at Melissa's breast. "Because you gave me everything. Because you were willing to risk everything to save people you didn't even know. Because the system failed you, and that failure almost cost me my family. And because," his voice cracked, "because 19 years you've been sitting outside this hospital, carrying knowledge that could have saved lives, and we made you too afraid to use it. That's not just wrong. That's evil. And I have enough money and enough power to do something about evil when I see it." Dr. Patricia Chen stepped forward. "I want to be part of this," she said. "Whatever program you're creating, whatever initiative you're funding, I want to help build it. What Elena did today, that needs to be studied, documented, taught. We need to understand the physiological basis for traditional techniques. We need to integrate this knowledge into our training programs. We need to create pathways for traditional practitioners to work alongside physicians legally and safely." "I'm in too," Dr. Webb said. Others in the room nodded, murmured agreement. The initial shock was giving way to something else: excitement, possibility, the sense that they were witnessing the beginning of something important. "Elena," Melissa called from the bed, her voice still weak but clear. "Will you come here?" Elena approached hesitantly. Melissa reached out and took her hand, pulling her close. "This is Sophia," she said, looking down at her daughter. "Sophia Elena Thornton. We're naming her after you. So she'll always remember that her life began with a miracle, and that miracles come from the most unexpected places." Elena looked at the tiny baby, at her perfect features, at the life that had hung by such a fragile thread just minutes ago. She thought about her grandmother, about 23 generations of parteras who had dedicated their lives to bringing babies safely into the world. She thought about all the knowledge that had been dismissed, forgotten, lost because the women who carried it weren't deemed credible by modern systems. "Your daughter is beautiful," Elena said, tears streaming down her weathered face. "And strong. Feel how strongly she nurses? She's a fighter, like her mama." Over the next 6 months, Alexander Thornton's promise became reality in ways that exceeded even his ambitious vision. Elena was granted special humanitarian status and a work permit. A team of immigration lawyers worked with federal authorities to create a pathway for her eventual citizenship. She was given an apartment, nothing extravagant, but clean and safe and hers, in a building 3 blocks from Manhattan Mercy Hospital. But more importantly, Alexander's foundation launched the Traditional Birth Wisdom Institute, housed in a renovated wing of the hospital. The institute had 3 core missions: to document and preserve traditional birth practices from cultures around the world, to research the physiological mechanisms underlying these practices, and to train medical professionals in techniques that had been nearly lost to modern medicine. Elena became the institute's first master practitioner. She was paired with Dr. Chen and a team of researchers who observed her techniques, asked endless questions, and worked to translate her intuitive knowledge into teachable methods. They brought in traditional birth attendants from Oaxaca, from the Philippines, from West Africa, from indigenous communities across North America. They created a living library of birth knowledge that existed nowhere else. Medical students rotated through the institute as part of their obstetric training. They learned to palpate abdomens with the sensitivity Elena demonstrated. They practiced the gentle rotational techniques that could turn a posterior baby. They studied case after case where traditional approaches had solved complications that modern medicine would have addressed surgically. The impact was measurable. In the first year, Manhattan Mercy's cesarean rate dropped by 18%. Maternal satisfaction scores soared. Birth trauma rates decreased. Most tellingly, outcomes improved for the hospital's most vulnerable populations: immigrants, women of color, low-income patients who had historically received the poorest care. Other hospitals took notice. The model spread. Within 3 years, 47 hospitals across the country had established similar programs. Medical schools began incorporating traditional birth knowledge into their curricula. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists published new guidelines acknowledging the value of traditional techniques. But perhaps the most profound change happened in the quieter moments, in individual births where Elena's presence made all the difference. There was Maria, a young immigrant from Guatemala, terrified of the hospital because her sister had died during a medicalized birth back home. Elena sat with her for 12 hours, speaking Spanish, using traditional comfort measures, helping her feel safe enough to give birth in an unfamiliar place. There was Jennifer, a Black woman whose previous births had been traumatic, who'd been dismissed and disrespected by medical staff. Elena advocated for her, ensured her voice was heard, combined traditional and modern approaches to give her the healing birth experience she deserved. There was Aisha, whose baby was breech at 38 weeks. Instead of automatic cesarean, Elena used traditional techniques to manually turn the baby, giving Aisha the vaginal birth she'd hoped for. One by one, birth by birth, Elena was rewriting the story she'd lived for 19 years. She was no longer invisible, no longer silenced, no longer forced to hide the knowledge that made her who she was. 2 years after Sophia Elena Thornton's birth, Elena stood in an auditorium at Columbia University, preparing to give a keynote address at the International Conference on Traditional and Modern Obstetric Integration. The room was packed with physicians, midwives, researchers, and traditional practitioners from 6 continents. She wore professional clothes now, simple but dignified. Her gray hair was neatly styled. She no longer smelled of the streets. But her hands were the same. Weathered, calloused, arthritis-twisted. The hands that remembered. "My name is Elena Maria Rodriguez," she began, her accented English clear and strong. "For years ago, I was begging outside a hospital, invisible to almost everyone who passed me. I carried knowledge that could save lives, but I was too afraid to use it because the system told me my knowledge didn't matter, that I didn't matter, that I should stay silent and stay invisible." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Then I heard a woman screaming. I heard a baby dying. And I had to choose, stay safe and silent, or risk everything to do what I knew was right. I chose to speak up. And that choice started something bigger than I ever imagined. Her voice grew stronger. "The knowledge I carry is not superstition. It is not folklore. It is science. Science learned through 23 generations of careful observation, passed down through oral tradition because my ancestors didn't have access to universities and medical schools. It is real. It is valuable. And it saves lives. But it is not the only knowledge that matters. Modern medicine saves lives too. Technology and research and evidence-based practice are powerful tools. The question we must answer together is not which knowledge is better. The question is, how do we honor all forms of expertise? How do we create healthcare systems that value wisdom wherever it comes from? She looked at Dr. Chin, sitting in the front row with Sophia, now a healthy, thriving 2-year-old, on her lap. I was blessed to work with physicians who were humble enough to learn, brave enough to try a different way, wise enough to recognize that their degrees didn't give them a monopoly on truth. But not every traditional practitioner is that lucky. All over this world, there are women like my grandmother, carrying knowledge that could transform birth outcomes. And nobody is listening to them. They're dismissed as uneducated, called dangerous, told their expertise doesn't count because it doesn't come with the right credentials. And mothers and babies are suffering because of it. Elena's eyes swept the audience. This conference is a start. The programs we're building are a start. But it is only a start. We need more hospitals willing to open their doors. We need more doctors willing to learn. We need more respect for traditional knowledge, more funding to preserve it, more recognition that wisdom comes from many sources. She thought of her grandmother, of the village in Oaxaca where she'd learned her craft, of all the babies she'd caught before crossing the border. My abuela used to say that birth belongs to mothers, not to institutions. Our job as birth workers, whether we are doctors or midwives or traditional attendants, is to serve the sacred process of bringing life into the world, to support it, to protect it, to interfere only when necessary, and to respect all the knowledge that helps us do that well. For years ago, I was nobody. I was a beggar that people stepped over without seeing. Today, I stand before you as proof that expertise can come from unexpected places. That knowledge doesn't only live in textbooks. That sometimes the person who can solve your problem is the person your system trained you not to see. She smiled, thinking of all the births she'd attended in the past 2 years. All the mothers she'd helped, all the babies she'd caught. My grandmother's knowledge will not be lost. I am teaching it to doctors who will teach it to their students. I am documenting it so it survives beyond my lifetime. I am making sure that what 23 generations of women learned about bringing babies safely into the world continues to matter. But more than that, I am living proof that we can change broken systems. That we can build bridges between traditional and modern medicine. That we can create a world where all knowledge is valued, where all expertise is respected, where every person, regardless of their credentials or their background or where they sleep at night, has the chance to use their gifts to heal. The auditorium erupted in applause. People stood, some crying, some cheering. Elena stood at the podium, no longer invisible, no longer silent, carrying her grandmother's legacy forward into a future where traditional knowledge and modern medicine walked side by side. After the conference, Elena walked through the streets of New York. She passed the corner where she'd begged for 19 years. Someone else sat there now, a young man with a cardboard sign. Elena stopped, pressed $100 bill into his hand, and looked into his eyes. "You're not invisible," she told him. "Whatever gifts you carry, whatever knowledge you have, the world needs it. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't matter. Don't let anyone silence you. When you know how to help, staying silent is the same as doing harm." She thought of Sophia, growing up knowing that her life had been saved by a beggar's hands. She thought of all the babies yet to be born, all the mothers who would benefit from the knowledge that had almost been lost. She thought of her grandmother, looking down from whatever place grandmothers go, finally seeing her legacy honored in ways she'd never imagined possible. Elena Maria Rodriguez walked home through the city streets, her hands, those weathered, calloused, arthritis-twisted hands that remembered everything, ready for whatever birth tomorrow would bring. Thank you for following Elena's extraordinary journey from invisible beggar to respected healer. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think differently about whose knowledge deserves to be honored, please share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Remember, you are not invisible. Your background is not a limitation, it's a foundation. The knowledge you carry, the wisdom your family gave you, the perspective that comes from your unique experience, the world needs all of it. Until next time, stay blessed, stay bold, and never stop believing that one person speaking truth can change everything. What wisdom did your grandmother teach you that the world needs to hear? Share your story in the comments below.